There we go. I think we are live. Welcome everyone to the December 2022 meeting of Creating the Future's Integrity Body, in many organizations known as the board, but it's not really known as the board because we're just a group of people gathering together to make sure we're doing things according to our values. I'm Hilda Gottlieb. It's delightful to have everybody with us. Today is unusual because we are streaming live. However, we're not asking folks to chime in because this really is a conversation for all of us here. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So if you are watching, welcome, and please add your comments into the blog. We will not be watching Twitter today, but we will absolutely be looking forward to your comments in the blog afterwards. So thank you, and we're glad that you're here. We will start today, as we always do, welcoming ourselves into the room and touching base with each other, seeing how we're doing. If you all will share who you are, where you are, whose lands you are resting on right now, and something that's been meaningful in your life. And as we think about land acknowledgement, which is the common term that we tend to use these days. At Creating the Future, we know that it's always about the people. It's never about the thing. It's not really about the land. It's about the people from whom that land was taken, from whom not just the land, but their lives were taken. Their way of life was taken. Everything about their way of life was taken, including what they had, which was the lands that they lived on. So if you could share just a little bit about where you are located. If the weather is crazy, let us know that the weather is crazy, and let us know what's meaningful in your life these days. And whoever would like to go first.
Okay, I'll do it. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Angie.
I'm Angie Echeverry. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, on Omaha Sioux land, what's awesome, right? There's a lot of awesome things. I'm still on my professional development leave, so I've been doing a lot of focusing on my research, which has been awesome. And of course, I'm excited for my daughter to be coming home from college. Yay. It's good to see everyone.
Wow, it is. First semester.
Yeah, she's almost done in finals right now.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing, because she's only 8.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't get how that happens. Oh, wonderful. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next then. Hi, everyone. I'm Carl, and I'm currently just outside London in the UK, where we've just had our first snow of the winter. And of course, we've had about 1 inch of snow, which means that everything's just fallen apart. And the roads are closed, the railways are closed, everything. I mean, our Canadian cousins would sort of look at us and just be hysterical with laughter. Compared to sort of like what they can sort of deal with. Awesomes. A bit like Angie, my boy is coming home soon, which is going to be really nice. And yeah, there's sort of lots going on and quite challenging times, but we're still here and so on. So that's awesome.
It is wonderful. I'm glad you're here. I'm wishing I was as bundled up as you. Who wants to go next?
I can follow that. Ron Bulmer from Halifax, Nova Scotia, lands of the Mi'kmaq. Any of you are interested in the history of the Mi'kmaq? We have a local elder here in Halifax who just finished updating his book, I think for the 3rd time, called We Were Not the Savages. It's really quite a enlightening kind of read. A different point of view than the white perspective. Carl, if it makes you feel any better, we had icy roads here and there was all kinds of accidents. So even though it happens every year, we don't seem to learn. I'm also happy that, well, I will be happy once we get a little more prep. But all 5 kids will be here. They haven't been able to all be here for a while, so also looking forward to that.
Wow,
Nice to see you all.
very awesome. Ron, could you put the link to that book in the chat? That would be wonderful.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Who wants to go next? What's going on in your world?
Well, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline DeMarco. I use the pronoun she and her. I'm joining you all from what is commonly known as Ann Arbor, Michigan, but is the lands of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot peoples. And I just learned, Jackie actually just shared this with me, so I'm sorry if I'm stealing your thunder, Jackie, but the state of Michigan just established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that I can also put a link to in the chat here in June, which is a good first step, which is exciting. Something awesome in my life is that every December, my partner and I on Fridays, we make a little holiday treat and watch a holiday movie. And we did our first one this past week because we were a little busy. And I always let my partner pick the first movie that we watch, and he always surprises me with a wild card stretch of a holiday movie. We started last year with Die Hard. This year was The Nightmare Before Christmas. So definitely a fun time expanding my definitions of holiday movies.
Awesome. Wonderful. Our local art cinema here plays Die Hard on Christmas Eve every year. So you're in very good company. Who else? What's going on in your world?
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Farah Mahestri. I am dialing in from unceded Ohlone territory in the Bay Area, California. And my awesome is honestly just that it is a very busy end of the year. I'm always thankful to be working with kind of interesting clients that push me to think deeper and explore kind of alternate opportunities as well. So excited to be ending the year kind of busy.
That's wonderful. And I know how you love having your brain pushed. So that sounds doubly awesome. Awesome. Justin, how about you?
I'm Justin. I am on land that was the home of the Natashkent and Piscataway tribes, and which is now Washington, D.C. And let's see, my awesome is my eldest daughter has wanted to see Wicked since she was, I don't know, maybe 9 years old. She's now 16, and we went last night, and that was just awesome to see them enjoying it. We went to the wrong showing time, but luckily they were able to seat us, and that was almost the disaster, but it was a disaster averted. So.
That sounds delightful. Awesome. Awesome. How about you, Jackie?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jackie Bradley. I use she or they pronouns, and I am nearby Madeline. So I am also on the lands of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot Nation in Southeast Michigan. And my awesome is actually also theater related. My partner and I went to see a local production of A Christmas Carol over the weekend, but it was done in the style of a 1940s radio broadcast. So we were watching the actors portray actors on the radio as opposed to the play itself. And they had a big band, like brass section, and they had singers come on to do the radio, like musical breaks and everything. And it was wonderful. It was really, really cool.
Oh, that sounds delightful. That sounds just delightful. Wonderful. Woo, wanted to give you a little bit of time to settle in. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I was dropping off the kids. Vule, you see in pronouns. I'm calling in from Seattle, which is on Duwamish and Coast Salish land. My awesome is that my kids still want to snuggle with me. And last night they crawled into bed at 1 a.m. and they're like, Daddy, we just want to snuggle. And it was just really sweet. And I mean, at the end of it, they became two tiny, cute furnaces on either side of me with their elbows in my face. But I just realized that I won't have many of these days left, and I just want to enjoy it as much as I can. So yeah, that's my awesome. But that's also why I look like this today.
I wish I had an excuse. That's wonderful. That is just wonderful. Dimitri, how about you? Let me hand over the mic.
Hello, everyone. Dimitri Petropoulos coming to you from Tucson, Arizona. I thought I would put a thematic rain scene behind me so that appropriate, though we're not in the jungle. So I'll fix that here in the near future. These are the historic lands of the Tohono O'odham people and many others that have been here over the millennia. That are some too many to name, I think, and just being aware of that. My awesome is continue to be a doting grandfather. We had our first video call with Athena and Dmitri in about 3 weeks, and it's amazing how much she has changed and how active she is. And it's always fun when she tries to hand us things through the iPad where we're asking her what she's holding and she wants to give it to us. So that's pretty amazing technology, and it's kind of fun to be able to participate in that and still be 800 miles away or whatever we are right now. So that's my awesome for today.
It is pretty awesome. Pretty wonderful. I am Hilda Gottlieb. I am also here in Tucson, Arizona, which is the lands of the Tohono O'odham, and as Dimitri mentioned, several bands of people before who gathered here because up until we wasted all the water, we white folk, there was perennial water here. And there was perennial water here for thousands of years. Tucson has actually been named a city of gastronomy, the first UNESCO city of gastronomy, I believe, in the country. And a big part of that is that we have been continuously growing things. Agriculture dates back 4,000 years. So there's been agriculture here for 4,000 years, and within 100 years, we white folk wasted all the water. There's now no water. It flows when it rains, and it'll be gone. You know, we're raining right now, and tomorrow it'll be gone. So yeah, there's that. My awesome, I will share my screen. Y'all know we're in the desert. We don't get rain very often, but this was what we woke up to this morning. Double rainbow outside. It is now, I think it stopped just a little bit, but it's been raining, and here in the desert, that is just, it's our lifeblood. So it's pretty cool to, I got up when it was dark. And then as I started moving around the house, I ran into to get Dimitri and say, the whole sky's yellow. And so the storm was coming in from the west and the sun was still up on the east. And so, yeah, it was a pretty dramatic morning. So all very good. Things have been very, very busy around here. And that is a really good thing because they've been busy with what we're going to dive into today. Deep thanks to Madeline, to Ron, to Jackie, to Justin, to Elaine, who is not here with us today, for really working in such a beautiful, beautiful way to be facilitating the conversations that we're going to have one of today. So I wanted to first thank you all. It's been pretty fun to watch and enjoy. Let's start with a little bit of a recap about where we've been, where we are, and what we are going to be discussing today. I'm excited about today because, as I mentioned, Jackie and Ron and Madeline and Justin and Elaine have been facilitating these conversations, which means they don't get to be in them. And so the ability for all of us to be in the same conversations as everyone, when we're asking our community what's next for creating the future, it's easy to forget we're community too. So I really, really just appreciate everyone being here because I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. In recapping, the reason that we're looking at what's next for creating the future, we have spent the first 5-7 years of our mission. We've always known that our mission was to experiment with applying catalytic thinking in a variety of settings, and to then share what we learn about catalytic thinking. And we have really spent the first part of our work, that first number of years, experimenting, doing demonstration projects, everything from demonstrating what it looks like to think differently about a board, our own board, and doing demonstration projects with others, applying catalytic thinking in a number of settings and seeing what happens. And what we realized a year or so ago is that what happens is so consistently powerful and positive, so consistently brings people together, so consistently moves folks towards really creating real change that is community driven, that we don't really need to experiment anymore. That part of our mission, we don't have to prove anything. We've proved it. And that now what we're ready for is sharing what we have learned about catalytic thinking. And so the question becomes, how do we share that? There's a million ways that we could share what we've learned about catalytic thinking. It could be that we're just a resource library that folks can click and do stuff, or we have a staff of 100 around the world and our budget is bazillion dollars. And it could be anything in between there. And so the question becomes, what are we going to do? Aligned with our values, we know that it's not up to us, no matter how many us there is. If the board is 8 or 9 people, if together as an engagement team, we're 20 people, it's not up to 20 people to decide what's good for thousands of people. And so we have gone out to our community, and the first thing that we did, and again, we're using catalytic thinking, first few questions of catalytic thinking, we asked in writing. Folks responded in writing, and you all have seen the plethora of responses. I think we're at like 70 written responses. And to those who are listening, to those who are in our community, you guys are awesome. These were not tick box questions. This wasn't, fill in 3 multiple choice questions and you're done. These required a lot of thought. And the fact that 70 people or so responded with such beautiful, thoughtful stuff. So to our community members, it sort of shows that folks actually care, that they feel that they are part of a community. That's a neat thing too. That old thing, what if we ask and nobody shows up? We didn't have to worry about that. That feels really good in terms of what an engaged community can be. And so the next questions are being asked. So those questions were all around those first questions of catalytic thinking. Who will be affected by our sharing what we've learned? Who will be affected by our sharing about catalytic thinking? And what could it make possible for them? Listening to people's aspirations, listening to people's strengths that they see that we have to build upon. And the next question is, okay, if the outcome, and as we synthesized last time, when we were all together in November, if the outcome really is shifting how we be with each other, mostly through the questions that we ask, shifting the results that we get that are the result of how we be with each other, all through the questions we're asking, because the questions we ask also guide how we be with each other. They guide how we think about things, and they guide how we be with each other. And shifting that from being reactive and competitive and scarcity driven to creating what is possible, Vu is you're always talking about that incrementalism versus let's go for what do we really want? And what would it take to shift that? What would it take to shift for that to be the norm? And so The questions that we're asking now are, okay, if that's what is possible, shifting the norm in how we be with each other so that we are creating what is possible rather than reacting to what's wrong, so that we're linking arms with each other rather than competing, so that we're building on the resources we already have rather than seeking out scarce dollars. If that's what our outcome is, then in light of our mission, which is to share what we've learned about catalytic thinking, what do folks need to know? What do they need to have in order for them to be shifting what the way that they be in the world, the way that they ask questions? I want to make sure that I've got in everything on my notes here. What I thought would be helpful is if we start out with just some reflections from Madeline and Jackie. You're, I think, the only one that hasn't been up to bat so far. You're going to start this week, but Madeline and Ron and Justin, you all have had some really, really incredible conversations with some of our community members already. And I thought maybe just some high-level reflections of what are folks thinking that they need to have in order to create that shift in their lives. What are they feeling that they need to know, that they need to have? What are your reflections out of what folks shared?
I could share a few. I was more the note taker. While Justin actually he's able to do both. I don't know how he can do it, but he does. I think some of the key things were this idea that there's a space that's being held for people to really be vulnerable and share authentically, and the people who are affected were actually taking part in providing the work toward these solutions that were eventually created. So there's this idea of collective in doing the work. There's an element of pain before you get to the good side of, the freedom and the new future. People have to go through that pain. I think the people leading the process seem to need support of other people that are future oriented or positive in wanting change. So being alone doing this is difficult. And yeah, that's as much as I'll share right now. Maybe Justin can fill in the blanks.
Sure, thanks, Ron. I thought actually one of the most interesting things, and it sort of took a while for it to coalesce, but the idea of normalizing. So there were conversations around sort of this idea of peer pressure and normalizing, and just, even if it wasn't specific to catalytic thinking, it was this idea of people just not feeling comfortable having to be, the cutting edge person. Like, it was part of what made it possible was that they felt like the places they were trying to do this, the openness to it at least was normalizing. It didn't mean that they had to know catalytic thinking, but and I just thought that was really interesting, because it actually started with one person talking about their childhood experience with the Boy Scouts and negative peer pressure, but all the things that they were absolutely willing to do because everyone was around them. And we were able to sort of take that, and that was something that really resonated to me, was the distinction between people who just sort of readily jump in and are willing to try things versus people who really, to hold something like this, need to feel like it's being normalized around them. And it was interesting how like we could use examples of negative outcomes or positive outcomes, and the common denominator was just what was being normalized in terms of the thinking, in the sense of belonging to a group.
Wow, it's a wonderful synthesis. Thank you. Yeah, there's that whole. I frequently reference the book Crossing the Chasm. It's about a 20 or 30-year-old book about. It's actually from the tech world of things that move from being just the innovators and the early adopters into what does it take to be common. To be, you know, and it's that bell curve. And
There was,
yeah, keep going.
yeah, and that just sparked, I mean, two things. One was there was also some pretty strong emphasis and almost critique, or actually some outright critique on language, and how the language also has to be normalized and accessible, and you know, cautious of intellectualizing. And so that was something else that stood out. And then the other thing, and Ron touched on this, and we didn't really delve as deeply, but I think it did raise some interesting questions, was, you know, when asked the question, sort of what made it possible for you to make the shift, someone said pain, and everybody nodded. And they spoke to how the pain at some point made them more receptive to other opportunities that would bring them to I'm trying to think of what was the language that stood out, a glimpse of freedom where they could explore possibility that was there. And I just wanted to share that because, again, we didn't really unpack that, but Ron and I talked a little bit afterwards of really thinking about that. I mean, both the normalization and that pain side, because we obviously don't want people to have to experience pain to be in a position to engage with this. But just sort of as a implication, trying to think about what is it that pain opened up, and is there a way to get there without having to go through pain? And again, we didn't really go down that path. But it was something that came up, which was, if this is a universal condition that people are putting forward, yet we don't actively want to put people in pain, trying to explore that in more depth. What actually was it that pain made possible, to try and see if there was another pathway there that we could better understand. And again, we didn't pose that question. It was in our debriefing afterwards that it came up.
What you're sparking as you're talking is, I think we're all in pain. I think that's the whole reason Creating a Future wouldn't exist if there wasn't that deep, if nothing else, frustration that the norms that we buck up against create pain. You know, if it wasn't for pain, Mr. Lay would not have a blog once a week talking about the pain. So I think that's, I'm really glad that came up. I'm really, really, really glad that came up.
Yeah,
Madam?
in sorry, not to butt in, but just to finish that thought, throughout the session, I was quite taken that a lot of these folks seemed very experienced. They've been up against the wall many times, and they kind of, I took from that, you know, or they were saying, you know, it's very complex. And this idea of patience came up, that that's a, you know, and the metaphor of a dance, you know, that we dance, and then the kids, our next generations coming up, will come into the dance and they'll take over. So it just sort of colored that a little bit nicely, you know, but this isn't a quick fix. It does take time. It's really layered. So it was all, that all resonated as part of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. It speaks to culture. You know, culture is how we perpetuate what we've normalized. So, wow. Madeline, what else, other things do you bring to your reflections on your conversation?
Yeah, and I'll invite also Carl as part of our conversation. So Carl, if you have anything to add to, feel free. Kind of the most important condition that we talked about in our group was this idea of trust, with the tenets of safety, hope, stories, and time as kind of the main themes that we saw. I'll talk a little bit about the safety and hope ones, because those I think were the most what we spent a lot of time on, where a lot of folks share this idea of, in order to think a different way, to change the way that you're thinking about things, to imagine a new future, that's not always something that is safe for us to do because of the racist, sexist, homophobic, like all of these systems that are in place. Imagining something new and radical is not always something that is safe for us to do. And then when we talked about this idea of even being able to be hopeful about and imagine a future that we're hopeful for, someone shared an example of working with youth around mental health and how so many of the teens that they're working with just don't have that hope. And so that idea of thinking big thoughts about the future in general was very overwhelming and very scary for folks. So we tried to talk a lot about what are the things that you need to feel safe, or what are those things that help you feel safe or know that this space is for you when you walk into a space. And that's where those components of stories and time and really getting to the point of getting to know each other and prioritizing our relationships in a non-transactional way, and all those good trauma-informed care practices came up. So it was a conversation I didn't anticipate, but was super, super valuable.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. You're reminding me of some work I did with someone who was working inside Palestine. This was about 10 years ago, which is just pain on top of pain on top of trauma on top of trauma, and there is no break, and really redefining the question of what does good look like. Good may not be, unicorns and lilies. It may be, my family can survive. I have a home that's not going to be bombed out or taken away. I mean, sometimes, in that math example, sometimes 0 is way too much to hope for. And a lot of what you all are talking about is, and I appreciate the language piece, Ron and Justin, that you were talking about is the language meeting people where they are? Are we making up more jargon and more acronyms? It is why you will never, you have not since we started, and you will never see us use the acronym CTF. We will never. I may do it when I'm scribbling on a board because I'm thinking fast, but you will never, because outside of 20 people, if you say CTF, they're going to be, hell's that? And we have no idea the degree to which we use exclusionary language, and jargon and acronyms being one of my big, but you guys have heard that all before. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that and for facilitating those conversations. They sound fabulous. I can't wait to re-listen to them. And by the way, the recording to the cloud did work. So for everybody, that was concerned about the mechanics. Now let's take our turn. If what we are about is sharing a different way of asking questions so that folks are aiming at what is possible, folks are meeting each other where they are, folks are connecting with each other, trusting each other. If what we are about is sharing different ways of asking questions towards that, what do folks need to know? What do they need to have in order for them to step into that? And I'll start with just a quick answer, which is, okay, so which questions do I ask? Which are, as people like to call them, the bad ones and the good ones, and I prefer to call them the effective ones and the less effective ones. but just as a starting point, I think, you know, okay, so I get changed, the questions change the world from what to what. What else do people need to know? What do they need to have in order to create that shift? Because that's going to be what we wind up doing. I mean, this is going to answer what our work has to be.
Guess for me, one of the things, and it goes to the normalizing. I wonder if even the notion of, I don't know if authentic inquiry exists in a lot of settings where people aren't encouraged to ask questions. They're actually encouraged to give an answer. And so, like, I think about it, and I also think about being in the role of facilitating this, of how challenging it can be for people to have permission to ask questions. Just, it doesn't even matter what the questions are, like just the premise that we can actually ask a question seems, you know, in some spaces like revolutionary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so there's some norming around valuing inquiry, valuing just the idea that we can ask questions.
What would it take for that to be what needs to, and not just Justin, anybody, that valuing inquiry? And you know, I'm picturing settings where somebody is, you know, in our newsletter this morning, you all saw that the Justa people. I'm just a volunteer. I'm just a second level manager. I'm just a for folks who consider themselves who are told just shut up and do your stuff. What needs to be in place for that valuing of inquiry?
Perhaps it is it's just a different way of taking forward the conversation we had earlier about safety, about psychological safety. But I think it's that sense that people need to be allowed to fail, and we need to encourage the fact that it's okay to sort of like sometimes like look or appear to like not know what you're doing and so on. And I've just posted something in the chat that I read the other day as part of something I'm doing at the minute that basically said we've become so focused on the idea that we're a meritocracy and that everyone has got to where they are because, you know, we're all knowledgeable and skilled and so on, that people almost sort of like they're forgetting their humility because they're so worried about they look like they're not meant to be there if they ask a daft question. That makes sense. Yeah. So all that's a sort of a long way of saying we've got to sort of keep repeating that, like, nobody knows the answer. This sort of thing that, you know, I mean, the only way that we're learning is through this constant questioning and searching. And again, what's that Einstein quote? You know, I mean, if it wouldn't be called research if we knew what we were doing, because we're constantly researching for the answers.
Yeah.
I think that I would also need to see people like me using it in situations that make sense for me. You know, maybe I'm not doing big organizational planning, but I can use it the next time my best friend calls for advice, for example. And so kind of seeing those variety of examples that show that this is something that can be and is being used by people like you.
Yeah. You know, what you all are raising for me is the question of privilege. Who has the privilege to ask questions and to change the thinking in an organization, in an institution, and who doesn't have the privilege? And who teaches those who are in managerial positions? And yeah, it's raising for me.
I was just gonna, sorry, Carl, go ahead.
No, you go first, Farah.
I was just gonna build on your comment about psychological safety, because I think there are times when I don't ask a question because I don't want to look foolish. I think there are other times where I don't ask a question, or I don't know how to ask a question because it's not just about my psychological safety, it's the safety of everyone else in the room as well. And I don't want to pretend like questions are neutral, right? Like questions have and continue to be used to cause harm to a lot of people and to a lot of communities. And so I would need to know that I'm not causing harm by asking some of these questions. And I think that there is value to that reflective space that asks us to think beyond just what would make it safe for me, and pushes us to say, how can I create a space that is safe for others around me? And I think that does come to the, like, what are these questions being used for? And where are these questions coming from? Like, how are people in power using these questions? Like, what's the agenda? What's something there behind that? So I just wanted to build on the notion that I think there's multiple reasons why people don't necessarily always raise a question, you know, and to pull that apart a little bit.
Yeah, what would it take? Yeah, Carl, and then I had a question.
Well, I was going to say, I think as Farah, you were talking about that, there are two things. One is oftentimes the questions we're pushing on aren't safe. They are challenging. And so I think that there's also something in this of the fear component around, if I ask this question, I mean, not only what you're talking about, which is the empathetic fear of everyone else, but so many of the questions we ask, you know, particularly the what does it take question at its core, you know, basically it's opening it up to some of what Carl's saying, which is there's an answer out there that I don't know yet. And I might not actually like the answer. The answer, I mean, in most cases, like if we are talking about change, like the answer is going to be different than the answer I've ever had before, which means I may not like it. It may tell me something I don't like, or it may ask me to do something I'm not comfortable doing because I'm so comfortable with what I'm doing right now, that's there. So I think there's also something just in the, you know, when we think about that willingness to inquire, people, it's a safety space in your head of being comfortable knowing that the answer might be a hard answer, it might be a different answer, it might be an answer that you're not going to expect. So that sort of humility and openness that you would personally have to even be able to pose the question, because, you know, Farah, you sort of got me thinking about, like, we often think about what happens to the question when it's put out there, and you're talking about what's happening before I can even get the question into the space, the barriers I might already be putting up for myself. I mean, even if I'm sitting in my own room doing this around, you know, what kind of garden do I want? You know, like if I really, I mean, when we talk about putting it into the personal life, like I may generate my own answers that are counter to what I've wanted to believe.
Sorry, just really quickly on that. I think that it is helpful to remember, though, that the instinct for most people when they're presented with things that they don't want to hear is blowback, is pushback. And that's not, again, it's not just a self-reflective space. It's not just that, like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I've heard something I don't want to hear. It's, I don't want to be in this space and I'm going to use my power to harm those who have said the thing that I don't want to hear. And that comes up a lot. And I think it's important to name that it's not just like I'm uncomfortable. It is I will channel my discomfort into causing real harm, not discomfort, real harm to people who have shared stuff that I don't want to hear. And so I think there is some of it, like I don't want to be uncomfortable, and so I don't ask those questions as a self-barrier. But there are times when it is not just about discomfort. It is about people being fired. It is about retaliation. It is about humiliation. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. I'm thinking through the questions then of, in terms of knowing that I'm not causing harm with the questions that I'm asking. What does that take? What do we need to have in place to know that the questions that we're asking in any given situation are not causing harm? What do I need to know? What do I need to understand? What do I need to experience or be assured of?
I think it's a little bit tricky because there are definitely things we can do to minimize the risk of harm. And even with all those practices in place and with the best intentions, I can never be 100% sure that the things that I will say will not cause harm to somebody. So to me, it's one, like learning about some of those things we can do to mitigate the risk, but also how do we respond when we do cause harm? How do we handle those situations with accountability and grace to repair the harm that is done?
I think there's also maybe you're making me think, Madeline and Farah, about, and again, I keep coming back to the thought of, 6 months from now, a year from now, what is Creating the Future doing? And so I'm sort of, that's my lens. There's a big piece in that people who are studying catalytic thinking need to know that questions can cause harm and need to be thinking about that, need to have instruction in some way or another that guides them, if nothing else, to ask or to say it. If you are in a room and things are feeling tense, or you think it might feel tense, or just you're facilitating, to be open about saying, questions aren't neutral. I'm going to be facilitating a conversation today, and questions aren't neutral. And here's my bias. In my old days of consulting, I used to walk in and say, I will tell you right now, I have a bias. And my bias is that this community can be freaking awesome. And every question I ask is going to be guided towards that. And when people would start down the rabbit hole of this is why this sucks and this is why that sucks, I would come back up and say, I'm telling you what my bias is. I think it could be good, and what would it take? But just as an example, to be able to say we all have biases that we're bringing in, but I think that there's something powerful in naming it. Farah, you so often talk about being explicit and naming it. And I think that there's something really powerful in terms of if you are sharing catalytic thinking, which includes us, naming some of the things that people may encounter when questions are challenging to them, when just being clear about it.
I think there's also a sense of when I've seen outsiders ask questions to a pack, let's say, or a group that know each other, it's less likely that question, if it gets to the core of a controversial item, it's most likely going to be not a good response, because there's this idea of a collective protectionism of whatever's going on. And yet if an inner member of that pack asks the same question, you could get a pretty good answer. So I think you need to have a lot of experience going into asking these questions about the context and the players, the politics, the what are the hot issues going in, so that if you want your question really to be entertained, you have to, if you're an outsider, you have to know you're an outsider and be very careful about how you pose it, or else you need to have an insider pose it for you, perhaps. I don't know, but it's tricky.
Wow, that brings up the whole issue of getting to know people, and trust, and how often do and now we're talking just about facilitators, but I think that I want to remind myself to share the story of my mom, which was not a facilitated conversation. But as facilitators, how often do we walk into a room where we don't know anybody? Can you be here on Saturday and facilitate this conversation? I don't know who's in the room. And the power of getting to know people and getting to know the dynamics and getting to know who people listen to and who they respect. I recall a facilitation years ago. Again, I haven't consulted in a long time, where everybody told me, I'll call her Mary, I don't remember her name. Mary's going to be your troublemaker. Mary's going to be the problem. Mary's going to, and everybody told me that. And then I talked to Mary. Mary was wonderful. Mary was amazing. Nobody ever listened to Mary, because just as we're all talking about, Mary had completely different way of looking at things. And she raised it, and she wasn't afraid to raise it, and nobody wanted to hear it. And by the time we were done with those sessions, everybody just kept coming up to me and saying, how did you get her to be so magical? How did you get her to, it's like, she's been magical all along, just shut up and listen to her. But we don't know that if we don't get to know people. And so I think that there's a piece of that there. Yeah, but I want to bring us back to the fact that catalytic thinking is not just a tool for facilitators to use as consultants. And coming back to the conversation that I share so often about helping my mom make the decision herself to stop driving when she was 88 years old. And the difficulty of finding questions that would not trigger all kinds of her past trauma. And she had plenty of it. My mom was a complicated beast. And it took me a year to find my way into that question, but it was because my intent was exactly what we're talking about here, was not to cause harm, not to get her to be defensive, not to, what was just the opposite, to get her to feel safe and psychologically safe. And it took, I think that we really need everybody in their comments, the written comments, and I don't know how they shared it in your facilitations, talked about the fact that this is stuff they use in their real lives. That this isn't just this isn't just a tool to use when you're in with a group. So as we're thinking about that, for folks to be shifting the questions that they're asking, so that the questions they're asking are bringing out the best in the people around them, whether that is Vu's 7-year-old or my 37-year-old. What do people need to know in order to shift those questions so that those questions are bringing out the best in people? Yeah, Vu.
Hi everyone. I really appreciate this conversation, and at the same time, it feels like we may not be having the conversation that we need to. I feel like what Hildy said was like, what does Creating the Future do in 6 months or a year, right? It seems there are a couple things that we can acknowledge. One is that people do find Creating the Future to be very valuable from the responses that we got. There's a lot of appreciation, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of, at the same time, what we're encountering is this sort of existential dilemma of many of us being exhausted. This conversation that we're having here is the sort of like community of practice conversation that people would have if we had like a regular Creating the Future. Like, you know, this month, let's talk about what are questions that we should be asking to get to the future that we want, you know, and so on. But I'm thinking like there are the content questions that we need to, and the curriculum type of questions. And then there's the question of like, who will carry this work forward? Who will be leading these conversations and so on? And Hildy and Dimitri are tired, many of us as well. And we got to figure out like, how does this move forward? And so I start thinking immediately, which may not be this is what we should be doing, but like, maybe it is. You know, I start thinking about maybe what we start thinking about is like Hildy leading a book or editing a compilation of all these ideas and all these lessons learned into an edited book of several chapters that we can contribute to, or whatever it is that we need to do. But I think I'm reaching, you know, like, I think we need to start talking about the existential questions a bit more. And because the content question, we can keep talking about them forever because they're fun to talk about, right? And the existential questions are more painful to deal with.
Yeah. I love the distinction, and I think it's a good place for us to go. There is the question of providing content. People need content. They need to be able to learn stuff. Reminding all of us, and those of you who are not familiar with, I'll give a very, very brief, the continuum of potential that we teach as part of catalytic listening, that people are at different stages of being ready to step into their own potential. And folks who just want a how-to tip are not at the same place as people who, okay, I really want to apply these questions to the big stuff that I'm thinking about, to those big existential questions. There's gradients in between there. What does it take to have the content that people need, which could just be a resource library. It could just be, we make sure that we've got everything that somebody who is at that point needs. And what does it take for folks who are having, I think you're really hitting it, Vu, in that a lot of people are facing these existential questions by themselves. They're not surrounded by people where they can have that conversation. They have not yet found an online place where they can have that conversation. They're feeling it, and they are in pain. And the systems that they're encountering every day are in pain. So looking at those two separately, as you said, the content is the easy part. You know, we'll have some classes, we'll have a book, I promise we'll have a book. We'll you know, we figure out what curriculum we need. But that other question, I think, is really where we're dancing. And thank you for clarifying that. You're really good at that. You're really good at seeing you're a synthesizer. I always appreciate that. So again, yeah, keep going.
Well, I think so. Something that I think came out that I was hearing in our conversations and also have just experienced across Creating the Future and other entities is, and perhaps it's why the normalizing resonated so much for me. Being in these spaces where it's a proliferation of ideas, I mean, which is a lot of what this is. It's like you have to get your head around a construct of how to engage with the world. And, you know, again, I don't have any direct experience, so it's all observational, but I am always in awe of AA, because this is a decentralized model that has taken a construct, very much so, and they've figured out the way to replicate it, where and it creates exactly what the things are we're talking about. It's a normalized space. It normalizes. It speaks to people at a point where they're trying to figure out how to engage in the world differently. And so I've seen so many times, the world can be a wonderful place, Hildy, but I've seen so many times this pattern of entities where there's a conceptual idea and an orientation that we're talking about, a mindset that they try to scale organizationally. And they think about, we just need more trainings or institutes. And then I'm like, the most successful one in the world doesn't do it. I don't know how it works behind the scenes, but what I know is that model works. It's volunteer, it's people come in and out, it's accessible wherever you are. So there's, and it happened before we had any digital connectivity of any kind. So it's not even a platform.
Justin, do you know of, or anybody, do you know of other in entities, for lack of a better word, because AA is not an organization, other entities that are as successful at that? And the reason I ask is one of the threads in AA is that AA is life or death. AA is I have fucked up for so long and I have hit bottom and I need help. And I'm wondering if there are other examples of that kind of distributed organizational being, just because we're not life or death. People aren't hitting bottom and their family leaving them and they've destroyed their finance. I mean, we all understand what addiction does. And we've all been touched by it by somebody in our lives. And so I'm wondering if there are other examples of that. We don't have to think of it now, but I would love all of us to be like mindful of and looking for, because we so often touch on AA. And it's a phenomenal model. And I'd like to know about more of them. It's also, there's also other ways of dealing with recovery. So we don't even have to go into that. There's other approaches, and there's people who love AA and there's people who hate AA. We're just talking about it as an organizational model. I'm not
Just a comment.
not pro or con. Yeah, Dimitri.
I'm really focusing in terms of the AA model of the point that you made, Hildy, about it being life or death. And so I was thinking of other types of organizations that do the same thing. Other than alcohol, other type of addictive behaviors that are addressed by this. Gamblers Anonymous, their life completely fell apart. The people who are on different kinds of drugs. So, I'm really wondering if the real driver of that model is the crisis of your life, in your life. And that obviously it reflects or affects all parts of your life. So once you are practicing the 12 steps, it informs everything. But I'm just wondering if, and I really hadn't really thought about it a lot till you mentioned it, Justin, and then when Hildy, you were talking about the crisis point, that really there are others that are similar, but they also seem to have the same kind of driver, which is my life is falling apart. I need to do this. So just a comment.
Well, the question that it's raising for me then is, what makes AA successful? Because in terms of as Boo raised it, the existential question, as a model, not what makes the recovery part successful, but and maybe in part it is, but as something that spreads like that, what makes it successful? The first thing that came to mind as we were all talking here is regularity. It's either meetings every day or meetings once a week or meetings, but that occurred to me. But what else makes it successful?
Y'all, I think that we might want to be, I appreciate the AA model and as a case study for this. At the same time, I want us to have some sort of a little bit of a lens regarding AA. I've had some experience with AA now, and apparently it's only 8% effective, and it's also basically a cult. And that weaponizes religion and makes a lot of people feel like shit when they, and this sort of belief that if you're a bad person if you're an addict and you just need to repent, and it's actually kind of horrible. And they've also been shutting down sort of like competing things like the Sinclair method that is actually 10 times more effective. So I'm not so sure. I think it appears to be effective. I'm not sure it actually is. We might want to learn from AA for sure, but I think we should also look at models like Black Lives Matter or other movements that have different chapters and people taking, and they also have challenges too. Like BLM has also had a lot of different challenges between the chapters, between some of the leadership, the national leadership, etc. We have Defund the Police, which has different chapters in different cities in Seattle, and they also have challenges. It's incredibly messy. All of these movements that are decentralized, I think the one thing that they have in common is that they are very messy. And you know that more than anyone, Hildy, because you write about movements all the time. And so I think what we need to do is take a look at what is actually working for different movements. And for a lot of them, no matter how effective they are, they tend to have some principles that are kind of set, like here is, AA uses like a Bible, actually. One of their founders wrote a book that then they actually read kind of like a religious text. Like some of the meetings are like, we're going to go to chapter 3 of the big book now. And it's kind of creepy. So I'm a little bit biased against AA, honestly.
And again, I'm trying to separate out the recovery model from the organizational model. And looking at BLM, looking at Defund, looking at so many, looking at indigenous wisdom in terms of what keeps something going. What are the key pieces seem to be principles, connection, ongoing regularity, and so I'm really thinking about, so if we're breaking it out from, there's content and curriculum, and that's easy, and then there's connecting and convening and trusting and building that community of practice, as somebody said before, that community of support where we're regularly in touch with people, where it's been so helpful, and some of you experienced this in the community engagement cohort that was learning together this past summer. And folks getting together once a week, whether it was in these meetings or then privately together, sharing what they've experienced, sharing what they've learned, sharing I tried this and it went south, and those kinds of things. And I think that there's real power. One of the other things, and Madeline, you had mentioned this a while back, is and you mentioned it just as like a comment in passing, and it like sunk really deep into my ears, which is there's nobody nearby me who's practicing this. So it's not, I can't find my place online, but there's real power in being local and being together with people. And so I think, and that's another thing that if we're, talking about the success of the AA model, they are there with each other. In the middle of the night, whether it's good or bad. I'm not placing any judgment on the model itself, on the recovery model, but whether it's good or bad, I got a problem in the middle of the night, I can call my sponsor and they show up. And so there's a very interpersonal connection when we have support, when we're in group therapy, we know that we've got that group around us. And so I'm wondering what does it look like? I mean, we're really getting down to it's the thing I love about catalytic thinking is you don't have to make up a whole bunch of ideas about what to do. The ideas just sort of it's becoming very apparent that we need to provide content, and that we need to provide ways for people to come together and share their experience.
Maybe a good sort of model for us to look at is the collective impact forum people, because it is not life or death thing, right? They have they have an online community, they have a message board, they have regular people contributing to providing different essays and content. And they have an annual conference once a year and regular, I think, monthly practice session, community practice type events. So we do, I mean, I think that if we decide to go that way, it still would require a lot of sort of management, because I think, yeah, some sort of structure to handle the content creation, the editing and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And World Cafe, I think, is another example of that, where, you know, it's an approach to facilitated conversations that has a, you know, international following. And to Vu's point, people gather, they have conversations. There are two things that are, I think, one is produces some anxiety for me, and then the other is more of an observation. The thing that produces anxiety is we do keep coming back to this common thread of pain and crisis. I mean, even Vu, when we talk about BLM or defund the police, again, it's coming, it is life or death for people. That's coming from in the same way that we think about with addiction, which comes back to the conversation that Ron and I facilitated of how much pain is a trigger to being open to the consideration. And it's just distressing for me to think that if that's the space, because we don't want this to just be a life or death you know, approach to the world. It really is just a different way of engaging. So that's just something that's coming up for me, that's an anxiety, and to reconcile, you know, how do we reconcile that kind of with the comparisons is a little bit challenging for me. But I do think, you know, Angie's raised before, you know, we also have trains of thought that have become integrated in our society, you know, neoliberal economics. Somehow that found a way to weave its way into sort of everything. And yeah, like every boardroom you're in, every politician, every conversation, there's this mindset that's underlying. And, you know, so somehow, you know, but again, I think that really was of the little engine that could. I mean, there are people who are the little engines that could, that seem to figure out how to put these things into motion. That's there. And again, that also sounds exhausting, to Vu's point, and to you, Hildy, you and Dimitri, like we're been at it a long time. It's kind of hard to do that. And then I guess I had a third thing, because the other piece, and you know, Carl, you often say, you know, the me time that you get out of here. And so, you know, having been involved for close to a decade now, I can just attest to the fact that part of the only place people sometimes have to come is these meetings. I mean, this is it. Like, it's just what were the board meetings or the integrity meetings. There was a window where we had some more parallel ones going on around program and educational stuff. But to Madeline's point too, it's like, there isn't places where this is happening, and there particularly aren't places where this isn't happening in the context of it being about creating the future as an entity. So that's just an observation that yes, it's true. There aren't spaces where the conversations are having of people who are just exploring and trying to figure out what this looks like in practice for them. That was a lot. Sorry.
No. And and what it brought up for me, the me time thing. Carl, you're going to go down in history for that. Somebody mentioned, and I loved this so much, in their written comments, that the benefit they get from creating the future is that we, quote, muddle through out loud, and that encouraged her to muddle through. And there's huge, that just like touched me so deeply, because we don't know, we're sitting here having these conversations. We don't, is anybody watching? Is anybody listening? I mean, I can look at numbers, but is it making a difference? And I think that that's a third piece, that there's the content, there's the connecting, there's also sharing examples, showing what this can look like. And I think that's a third piece.
Yeah, there was a fellow on our conversation who actually did have a passion he wanted to pursue. And I think if we could have, when I think of the Facebook group, that's one of the things that was lacking a bit, is there weren't actually people going through the model, you could say, or the structure of asking the questions and setting the conditions, then finding the actions from those. There wasn't a lot of modeling of that. And I think this guy, for example, he'd be open to that, I think, to have support, to go through that and see what happens. But for whatever reason, we never drilled down to find out why he didn't, if he knew that Facebook group existed. He didn't like Facebook, he did say that, but we didn't find out. But I think you could have a different reaction there if people saw people actually going through it, then that might kind of prime the pump, so to speak.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody sees Facebook as a safe space. So you can start with that.
I think that's part of some of those connecting threads between a lot of those like movement building organizations that we're talking about too, is that there are people of all different experiences with that topic as part of that group. And you don't need to know all the answers in order to join. For example, I don't need to know how to protest to join BLM. I know that there will be people there that can help teach me how to do it safely and where to show up when and what to bring and all of those things. So there are those guides that can show the way and can talk about, some of those lessons learned so that we don't necessarily have to, and can show, here's how we did it before, here's how we did it after, and I think about Justin's comment about a lot of what's leading us here is it's crisis. I don't know that necessarily has to be crisis, but when I think about what makes me change the way I'm doing something, is because the way I'm doing it is no longer working for me. And so I need to find, I twisted my ankle, these running shoes no longer as supportive as I need to. So I'm going to get a new style that I haven't had. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a life or death crisis to have those experiences. And someone in my group even talked about, like, what if we modeled, like, here's how I did the situation without catalytic thinking, and here's how I did it with catalytic thinking, and how they were different. So you can start to kind of show the way that maybe the old way isn't working. Here's kind of what is going to rock your world.
Yeah. Oh, Carl.
I also really like the muddling through thing. And if I have one constant in my sort of working life, it's that when you do start talking to people about things they're doing at work, the thing that always sort of comes back is, oh God, I'm so glad someone else has got that problem as well. I'm so glad someone else is sort of experiencing that. And, like to sort of state something like rather obvious, but, we are not in the business of producing widgets in the stuff that we do. There's no textbook that says do this, not that, because everything is so contextual to a time and to a place and so on, that practice inevitably, it's always emergent. So the only way that you can get through these things a lot of the time is by talking things through with people and trying to work out what are the better ways of doing things, because there is no correct way of doing things. So I guess the implication of that sort of comes from us is, it keeps coming back to, in some respects, the conversations are almost as important as sort of any sort of like product or thing that we sort of put out there. Those things or products, they're a starting point to trigger off. It's your point about changing the questions. These are things that are just triggering off sort of the discussions in the first place. And again, sorry, I mean, I'm a bit of an amateur at sort of this stuff, but I mean, I've just been reading. I'm doing as part of a thing I'm doing. I had to read a bit of stuff a couple of weeks ago about how teams come together, and this stuff from psychology called social determination theory, that basically sort of says that, I mean, people need autonomy, they need a sense of belonging, and I mean, they're part of something big, and they need to know that they're good at what they do. They need to know that they're mastering sort of what they do. And those three basic needs, I sort of keep coming back to it. That's what people need in organizations, and that's what functions or things that we do, that we're trying to satisfy those needs in terms of how we do things.
You know, it feels like the three chunks that winnow out by the time we look at, it's a perfect point for Farah to be coming back, because I was going to do some summarizing anyway, so I will wait until she pops back in. You're back. I was just going to do a little bit of summarizing. We had a party, we all got drunk, it was great, we went out dancing, but now Farah's here. I'm sorry. Where we went to was a couple of places, and you'll chime in, because I think we're at a point of sort of bringing all of this together. We started to talk, and Vu was talking about the fact that, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, Vu, that there's the content and curriculum part of what we talk about. What do people need? What do they need to know? What do they need to understand? What is the stuff? And then there's the existential questions that people need a safe space to have conversation in. And that, you know, and we talked a lot about the fact that the content is the easy part. You throw some classes up, you have a book, you have a whatever. Are there spaces where people can have these conversations in a safe environment? We talked a lot about going through case studies together. I'm having a problem with my board. Can we go through and apply catalytic thinking in a safe environment where people just come together? So looking at those two functions, and then we started to also talk about the third function that folks find value in, which is our experimenting out loud. And that someone actually said in their comments in the questions, that they value the fact that we muddle through out loud, and that encourages them to muddle through and to experiment, to try things. And so what I'm wondering as we're talking about this, we also spent a whole bunch of time, and I'd love your thoughts on this, and you don't have to answer now. We're all just sort of putting our thinking caps on for as we think of things. Let's get back to each other via email or whatever. But we had a bunch of conversation about the AA model, and about the fact that as an organization, separating that out from the recovery part, which there's question about if it's effective, if it's harmful, if it's et cetera. But looking organizationally, that AA it seems to self-replicate and isn't a quote organization with chapters, but seems to emerge where it's needed. And we talked about the fact that what we were looking for was other examples of that organizational model, because what we keep coming up with is AA and Gamblers Anonymous, and even when we're talking about defund and BLM, that, and acronym Black Lives Matter. Okay, sorry. We also talked about that. That these are life or death situations. So that when we're talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, somebody is at a horrible place in their lives. When we're talking about defund the police, people are being killed. That these are life or death situations. And what we're trying to think about in the next couple of weeks, however long, is, are there other examples of sort of these self-generating models that are not life or death? And so that was another point that came up. What's occurring to me as we're talking about this, and we've talked about so much of this, and y'all have been in other conversations. We're going to have 2 more this coming week. That people have been very, very clear, and we've been very clear on what conditions need to be in place. People need to be able to connect with each other in safe environments. They need to be, they need to have an opportunity to express their pain and to focus on what good might look like related to their pain. Not the pie in the sky, but it may be, as we talked about with the Palestinian example, it may be that they survive the day, that their house isn't taken or blown up. The fact that we need to meet people where they are with both language and just in life and being, we've talked about these conditions quite a lot. And what becomes clear, at least in my mind, is that the next step in this is maybe first to prioritize. There's only so many hours in a day. Which do we focus on first? And second, to start really asking the questions of what are the various ways to implement this and which makes the most sense, which actions are coming out of this, because I think we're at the point of starting to ask those questions. But actions in service to what? I think we have that question down.
My apologies, everyone. I have a meeting that's way less fun than this one coming up.
Any reflections, Vu? Anything that's standing out to you?
I think we've made some progress. Just I feel like we've had this sort of like part of the existential crisis is how has this been valuable to people? How do we have a reason to justify our continued existence? And it seems like it's resounding, at least, from a biased survey, right? Because people who are responding are likely going to be biased towards creating the future. But I do think that moving forward, the existential question that I pose, Hildy, is not to, it's about us as a group of people and how much time and energy we have to carry the work forward. And that's something that we have to figure out and be honest with ourselves about. And if we don't have the energy, then who do we need to bring on and how? Yeah.
I'm glad you're
So
here.
thanks everyone.
Other thoughts? Thoughts, reflections, stuff we left out? I think we're at that point of having the, or are we at that point? Am I making an assumption? It feels like we're at that point, but am I making an assumption? I will take silence as maybe we're at that point. We are going to have 2 more conversations this week, which I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing from folks. Many of the folks in those conversations are folks that have not had lots of direct contact with Creating the Future. This is the first time they're reaching out. Names that I don't recognize. And sometimes I recognize names but don't know the people, and in this case there's some names that I don't even recognize. So I think these are going to be really interesting conversations that will in many cases elicit some of what we're talking about here. And from there we will spend next month, we will start to prioritize in January. And then we can be talking about prioritizing which these we tackle first, in what ways, what makes the most sense. And the important thing that I'm thinking about in reflecting on Vu saying, what do we have the energy for? And Justin, you mentioned it as well. To me, that comes down to assuming we have the same organizational model as everybody else. You know, the question of what will it take, if this is what's important, what will it take, is very, very different than how will we. And so I'm really looking forward to, if this is a direction that seems to be prioritized, pick one of them. I don't care. Whichever one the world says we should be prioritizing, then the next question is, okay, what needs to happen? What will it take for this to be the most effective it can be is very, very different than we're going to start a program. How many people do we need? And so I don't want to be intimidated by any of this, which is what tends to happen. We go to the how will we, and how will we is the most intimidating, is the most, oh geez, now we got to raise $16 million, and where are we going to get the people? And I've got stuff to do, and my kid is sick. And it's a very, very different question than what will it take? What actually needs to happen? And what are the various ways that we can come up with that? And I'm very much looking forward to those conversations, hopefully starting in January and hopefully ending up quickly, so that whatever monies we do need to raise, we can start raising the money. But I'm very, very much looking forward to it. So let's all just take a deep breath. This has been a big conversation today, and I so deeply appreciate all of you. And us. It's not just I appreciate the us. That might be my reflection. But if you took any notes, if there's anything that stands out to you that you want to circle, and let's just share what is standing out to you from our conversation today. Wow.
So our conversations always ebb and flow. We have days where you can't get us to shut up, and we have days where they get a bit quieter, and today feels a bit of a quieter day. And I do wonder if we're feeling a bit intimidated about the fact that it is scary to sort of know what's sort of coming next. And I wonder if we're sort of not quite sure what to do. And I hear where Vu was coming from, that, I mean, about the sort of the need. There's always the temptation, isn't there, to rush to sort of doing really practical planning sort of things, and that's never been our way. But I mean, as you've heard me in times past, I mean, I sort of see where he's sort of coming from, and I think maybe just because it's getting to the end of the year and so on, and I mean, it did resonate a bit, like we've said a few times about how like everyone's a bit tired and stuff at the minute. That's not a sort of excuse or anything like that. That's just an observation. That's probably a bit about how I'm feeling at the minute. But still an enjoyable conversation.
It has been for many people a very tough year. It's been a tough few years. And we're all emotionally exhausted. I know I am. It's, we're all, yeah. Thank you, Carl. Thank you. Anyone else? What are you bringing out of the meeting? What's standing out to you?
Oh, sorry, Justin, did you want to go?
Go ahead.
I just had two thoughts. One, it was I really found it meaningful and helpful to hear what other people who are in practice, right, are saying about things, and I think, I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road. And of course we can contribute as this group, and we're also doing our own kind of practice, but letting those, I guess, really paying attention to those voices and centering them seems important to do. And so that's one thought. And there was another thought I had too that now
It'll be back.
I've lost it. It will come back.
It'll be back.
I was just going to say, first, I'm sorry I missed the party and what sounds like a fascinating conversation. I'm going to go back and watch it. I am also reflecting on it. In some ways, it feels like I've been in this moment before, several times And I think there's something there that I like want to toy with as well. But this year, a colleague and I launched this like Women of Color Leadership cohort. And it took us, quite a while to get it off the ground. And the number of conversations we've had over the years where it's like, we're really, really excited about the content and developing the materials. And we would meet and not let ourselves do that because we were like, but we have to be practical, and we need to come up with the marketing plan and the like pricing plan and the this and the that, and like, how are we going to legally structure it, and like, who's going to collect the money? And it's something I don't know that I have the answer to, but it was always such like a buzzkill, right? And I recently launched a podcast, and it was kind of the same thing, right? Where like when we were talking about the content, it was just like energy and excitement, and then we would get to the like, who's going to edit the thing, and then there would be weeks of nothing. And that's not to say that those things aren't important. And it is just one of these, like, I think it's a continuing question of how do we better meld that energy? Yeah, so I don't know the answer, but it is definitely like an interesting reflection point.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things that I have found, because my soul tends to go to the place that you were just talking about, is there are folks who thrive on the doing. For me, I love these conversations, and I love the exploration, and I love the ideation, and I love it until exactly what you just talked about. It's not where I thrive. And as you look at creating the future's organizational structure, that's pretty clear. So it's why I keep coming back to it doesn't have to be we do it. What does it take is so much more powerful than, what do we need to do is, in my mind, just to drain. And there are people for whom that is what they live for. And that, to me, it's okay, find them. It ain't me, find them. So thank you, Farah. You were like so speaking to my soul, I can't tell you. Justin.
So there are a couple of things, and I was reflecting on the distinction. I think we, in terms of sort of what it takes, there are two roles that really stand out for me. One is the person who wants to practice and/or as a practitioner, which is a lot of the, space for people to come together and, what is this? How do I do it? What's my experience? But I think the piece, and this is, and again, it has the religious connotations, but if we strip the role away, the proselytizer, that's something is going on in these movements, whether it's neoliberal economics or, AA, there's a proselytizing that's going on that is in itself a role, which is actually, I think, the piece that I'm drawing the connection to the uptake. So it's not can people do this? Do we have resources where they can learn it? But we're actually talking about scaled uptake of people doing this in their lives. And it seems to me like one of the things that takes is this proselytization capacity, which is exhausting for people who are not that, and inconceivable for some people to even be that. Yet it seems like this critical, and I echo sort of being in these spaces where it's that same thing. It's like the content's rich, the people love it, they want to talk about it, but then it just sort of just plateaus and then eventually starts to fall off because there isn't that energy to spread. And then we try to structuralize spreading, and it doesn't. That's where we get to. We need $1 million for the ad campaign, and if just people would know, they would do it. And it's like, no, people know a lot of shit they don't do. So that's a false assumption. So yeah, that's something that's just sort of really resonating to me as something we need to think about and talk more about.
Wow, yeah, yeah, you're like, thank you. Because with that word proselytizing, and again, if we strip the religion out of religion, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. Buddhism's been around for going on 3. Judaism's been around for going on 6. You know, what creates that? And some of them are faiths that deeply believe in not proselytizing, and yet they have still been around for 3,000 years. So there, you really have me thinking about, okay, so what is that? Thank you, Justin.
I don't mind bouncing off that one. Having spent many years in church sort of organizing, one of the intake models of almost every church is, how do you treat your newcomers, right from the welcome at the front door all the way through, and getting them involved. And there is a very well thought out process for doing that. You know, once you welcome them, you find out their hobbies, and, you know, it just goes from there, which kind of speaks to the energy portion of this, that, you know, you want to move people into what resonates. What everyone has a unique thing that, or a set of things that trigger them and that interests them, and it comes from within and it turns them on. And so the trick is trying to get people into those places quickly enough so they can get turned on before they get turned off. And I think the worst thing to do if you have a bunch of committees and people that need to do things is to tell them they need to do it on that committee. You know, people always, I think, need to feel the ability to get off, no matter if it needs to get done or not. If it's not triggering you, if you're not light and happy and looking forward to it, you shouldn't be there. In fact, it's a detriment if you're there. It's not a help. You know, this is like going on an adventure, a trip. You know, that word came up during our session, and think if you're going on a camping trip or something. You know, everybody kind of does what their interests are. That's what kind of determines what kind of trip you have. And if you think of the work that needs to get done like a trip, we all take that part of the adventure that we love, and that feels good, feels satisfying to us, feels engaging. So it seems to me that solves the energy part for me anyway, if I can just find a place that, you know, so that proselytizer, you know, Justin, they're out there, the marketing people in the world. I used to be married to one, you know, so they live for that. I also think in terms of actions, it came up earlier, the question, you know, are we ready for actions? And it strikes me that this is an iterative process. So of course, it's good to get to the point of doing something, whatever it is, just pick something, get at it. And then, you know, for me, I was more quiet this time because I was thinking, you know, there was quite a bit to think about in terms of conditions of these, you know, complex issues. So I look forward to selecting a few actions. It doesn't have to be many. It could just be a few that people feel energy for and that are willing to get behind in a while, and then follow it up and see where that leads. And I think, you know, I've been thinking about this idea, Justin, of your, you know, this normalization and sort of replication modeling. It strikes me that it does that. You know, if you look at AA or any of these other groups, that is normalization, because the model is so strong. You feel part of it wherever you are. If you're following the model, you have your following and you feel comfort because it's the same everywhere. So it strikes me you know, that if we come up with a model that's easy to replicate, that will help us in this normalization process, it strikes me.
Wow, thank you, Ron. Tons to chew on. Awesome.
I can go next. I'm still thinking about, I think, Farah's point around, is it safe for everyone else in the room for me to ask questions? Because I think we do a lot on how to like teach and guide and support each other in using catalytic thinking, like, and how to ask the questions and how to use the questions. And not as much in terms of like, and what do we need to do to prepare everyone else? Like, what do other people need to receive those questions? Because I've been in situations before where I've been called just kind of in the middle all of a sudden to kind of ask some of those questions, and without the opportunity to do some of that prep work and guidance, it has not been as successful. And so what are the pieces that we need to use catalytic thinking, and what are the pieces that we also need to receive and participate in catalytic thinking is what I'm thinking about.
Huge, huge. Yeah. And so much of that is just a matter of we don't get to know each other, so we don't even ask. Jackie, what's occurring to you?
Lots. This feels like it was really rich today. And the thing I am actually thinking about is like an old chestnut facilitation tool where everyone kind of puts their ideas for what is the next thing to do all around the room, and everyone has little stickers and they go and they put it on which one's their favorite. And how one of the most important lessons I ever learned is when you do that activity, you then ask, and who wants to take charge of this one? And that's how you really find where the energy is, because if everyone's like, well, that's the best idea, it's obviously the best idea, and no one is willing to say, and I will help lead it, that's not where our energy is, and let's keep going down the list. And how that was just one of the most important facilitation lessons I learned around that, and how it's just feeling really applicable to this conversation around how do we find that energy and make sure that we're letting that kind of guide us.
I love that. I love the, and if it's nobody, we're not done. Wonderful, thank you. Dimitri, how about you?
A lot to unpack today, just sort of thinking about what everyone's been talking about. Justin's comment about neoliberalism, it's in bite-sized portions. I mean, there is no one class for it. There is no whatever. It's talked about in many different ways in many different places, to the point where it's ubiquitous. Nobody even thinks about it anymore as being something that was created only a few decades ago. So I'm just sort of thinking about that. I'm also thinking a lot and reflecting on Farah's, is the question safe for the person you're asking? And to me, that's a really powerful thing that I'm not sure what the answer is to that. You know, obviously approaching people with compassion and love and no bias and whatnot, which is easy to say and hard to do. So I'm really thinking about what does that mean? The other thing that I'm reflecting on is the safe space idea that ties into what Farah was talking about. What is safe space? What is it? What does it mean to each individual? Because I think it's different. You know, we have our own definition of it, but I think it's different for people based on their experience and who they are and what they've encountered in the past. So these are more questions than specific approaches. I was also thinking about, Vu's comment that some of the models are well promoted, but aren't necessarily effective for what they're promoting. And that's really, something that I'm sort of pondering and thinking about, because I know this works, but I know it works for me. And I know it works, in the examples that I've seen, it may not work for other people. So a little scattered because there's been lots of things I've been pondering here today based on the conversation. So those are some of my reflections.
Wonderful, thank you. Angie, did you have another thought?
The thing that I forgot I wanted to raise was just the issue of trauma that we talked about at the early on, and how even though these models, like Alcoholics Anonymous and so on, or life and death, I mean, I think a lot of us have experienced trauma in different ways that, may seem life or death in a way, right? Like, I mean, there's a range of those experiences we've had, and it seems recently, I've been interacting with a lot of people, my colleagues, and like the last conference I went to last month, and it was amazing to me how many people, who are full professors with tenure are like, what's my life about right now? Like, what are we doing? Rethinking everything. And so, we are there is, I guess, on the one hand, being aware of that and paying attention to that is important for what these discussions, but then also, I guess, it's an opportunity too at the same time. That's what the other second thought I had.
Yeah, very much so. Very, very much so. My reflection, much like all of you, is wow. There's just so much to chew on here, and I guess my biggest reflection is that I really think that we're ready to start diving into what we can do. I think and I love that it's not just up to quote us. That as we're prioritizing, we are going to go back out to the folks who have been communicating and new folks and say, okay, these are the things we're thinking about. Here's the things you told us. Here's the things that we've synthesized. A, do you see something different? What did we miss? And B, we want to prioritize. Let's all prioritize together. I am, as much as, like everybody else, I'm exhausted. Like really exhausted. And Angie, I really apologize. I owe you an article from about 3 months ago. You sent me a draft. And so it's been that kind of time. But this is also so energizing. There is something so powerful in saying, this is what everybody wants. This is what everybody's saying is important. This is what they aspire to. This is what they value. And they were so clear about it and continue to be. And it is such a gift. And I don't, for the life of me, understand. I do understand why people don't do this, because we gave up control. We gave up control and intentionally, and we could at any moment, because that's the way organizations are structured. We could at any moment say, yep, thanks an awful lot, but we're going to go this way. And because our values are what they are, we won't. And that just feels so aligned. It feels so good. So I want to thank you all. And I want to especially thank those of you who has been Ron and Madeline and Jackie and Justin for you all have put in so much. Obviously, this is giving you energy, because in answer to Jackie's question, you all are diving in, and that just feels awesome. So I will probably not see you all in one place until the new year. I am wishing you all so much love and so much joy and so much health, and the health of those around you. The season is, unfortunately, the COVID season is starting up again with the flu season, with the everything else season. Please stay safe and keep your families safe. And I love you all.
Love you too.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
See you all.
Bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Be well,
Have a great-
everyone.
Happy holidays.